Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Project Sanity. I'm sorry for being 5 minutes late, but if you watch this show, you know that's always going to happen. I don't know what to tell you. Like the day we're 5 minutes early, the day you miss, 10 minutes of the show. Let's be honest. That's the time you're showing up. Uh, we have a packed show for you tonight, and I'm joined as always by my lovely producer, Yolanda Vega. Say hello, Yolanda Vega. You don't need to explain anything. You don't need to explain anything. They don't pay us. We have a show plan. Don't make a commentary on the quality of it quite yet because I can't promise anything. It's like when you say on your OkCupid profile that you're funny. Like don't promise things you don't know you can deliver.
Well, I mean, you can't deliver on that, Brandon, because you're not funny. But
Anyway, and we're also joined by my Socratic life partner Adair. Adair Schmidt. Say hello.
hey, folks, glad to be back. Had a what was it, 2-3 weeks sabbatical? Depression
Hey,
sucks.
it does. It is. And if you're having trouble with either depression or anxiety, either out of nowhere or caused by difficulties in your life, please seek help. you know Talk to a
Yeah,
friend, talk to a professional, talk to a colleague, come and talk to somebody you can speak to honestly.
I personally needed to take the 2-3 weeks off from my depression because the guy next to me, sometimes I want to strangle him. Damn it.
Okay. it's, it's absolutely important these times, and really in all times, to take care of yourself both mentally and physically, and not sort of just try to push through, because that is a temptation in this capitalist environment, to just keep pushing, keep working, keep you to run yourself ragged, because if like that's another way they get to us. We feel alienated from our own emotions. Or the fact that we should alienate ourselves from our own emotions because they get in the way. But I'm here telling you, you can listen to me. Go seek help. Take some time for yourself. Engage in some self care, because there is no virtue in working yourself to death, even though you've been taught that your whole life. But let's move on to our first topic. I know I don't want to harp too long on this. Note an important announcement. And speaking of important announcement, I want to say thank you to Benjamin Dixon, as always, for allowing us to live stream on his channel, his lovely channel, his robust channel, his girthy channel.
Swear to
Uh,
God, Brandon, it's
and
family friendly.
I'd like I'd like to implore you to like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel, do do all those lovely things. Comment, shameless plug, shameless plug, shameless plug. So let's move into the first topic of the night. I wanted to talk about the resistance, because I think it's a good opening topic, because we're going to talk about a lot of stuff tonight. Uh, so I've been thinking a lot about the resistance after engaging with them on Twitter, engaging with a lot of people in random Twitter threads about what the resistance is and what it is not, and what we should be doing as leftists within this resistance. And I think I've been able to uh, point out three problems that I have with the resistance, and three problems that they have after these engagements. No. I'm being honest with you. The first is that they have a very, very specific goal. And as you can see, Keith Olbermann was to the right of me for a second. They have a very, very specific goal, and that specific goal is no Trump. Uh, that might vary to certain degrees insofar as they may, well, no Trump and I'm okay with Pence, or no Trump and no Pence, or no Trump, no Pence, but Ryan's okay, or no Trump, no Pence, no Ryan, and maybe we can install Nancy Pelosi, et cetera, et cetera. But really, their goal is no Trump. The second problem I identify with them, they have a lack of a coherent ideology. It's like there is nothing underlying the resistance besides this one goal to get rid of Trump that gives them some kind of rationality outside of trying to get rid of Trump. And three, they are resistant to self-reflection, and they cannot deal with a cogent critique of themselves or with the Democratic Party as a whole. Which, and again, these are a lot of the same problems that we saw with the Democratic Party as a whole within the general election. But it seems to have continued within the resistance, like these three things. And I mean, does anyone else have any problem with resistance that they can think of?
Oh God, where do you even start with problems with the resistance? The name. You can't resist the people that have the exact same ideology as you. Let's face it, Dems and Republicans have the same ideologies. Occasionally, the left is a little bit more socially progressive than the right. And that's very occasionally and on very few issues, and usually that's just goddamn lip service. I mean, frankly, they're the same. That's why Dems voted for to sell your internet history, folks. So make sure, those of you at home who have not heard this yet, please use a VPN. You can either make one yourself, there's guides on Google, or purchase a subscription to one, but it's the best way to keep your what you're doing online private.
And go to Opera. Yeah, Republicans voted through. No,
the House also voted, and Dems in the House voted yes.
Really? I thought it was entirely down party lines.
No, I'm like 99. I'm 99.9 continued% sure I've heard of Dems voting for it. I'd have to look it up, but I'm positive.
Someone fact check this, but
please fact check me, because I could be wrong, because I hate Dems as just generally right now, because they can't do anything. It's
I don't think
yes, and white supremacy.
I don't think that the resistance as a let's be honest, resistance, it lacks central leadership. There is no leader of resistance, despite the fact that Keith Olbermann. Yeah.
But there is guys. You didn't get the secret telegram? Hillary Clinton's leading the resistance, guys, by hiding out in the woods and being a terrible human being.
She's out of the woods now. But what I was going to say, like, there is no actual formal leadership of resistance in the same way there's a formal leadership of the Democratic Party or whatever. I mean, there have been people who have elevated themselves or have been elevated by the media to to this point of head of the resistance. Keith Olbermann nominated himself, and obviously there's your Rachel Maddows, and there's your Hillary Clintons, and there's I guess Tom Perez now, and Bernie Sanders. Like, all these people have been going out there and get various amounts of media, but there's no formal actual leadership. And to speak to your point there about the ideology, they don't really have an ideology. Like, what their ideology
is. The resistance like the group, the resistance doesn't. But let's be real, who the resistance is. The resistance is Democrats and Republicans who don't like Trump. So they have, and that's where I get the ideology bit from, is their core ideologies are the same. How what they brand themselves as the resistance, and this idea of the resistance, you're right, that doesn't have an ideology. But the people that are espousing to be the leaders, the people that are saying they're a part of this, the people that claim to be actively doing work on the ground, aka crying on the internet most of the time, at least the ones that I've met, there are some people that are actually going out there and doing good. A lot of these folks have the same core ideologies, and that is capitalist, white supremacist, and just all around status quo. So that's what the resistance is. That is their ideology. Whether or not it's stated, we should all, at least at this point, be able to look and say, you know what, this is implied. They're implying that they are no different, that they are the Dems. They are the Hillary Clinton wing of the party. And that's really what you have the Tea Party, you have the resistance, you have your quote unquote normal Republican Dems, you have the rest of us. Regular people with actual ideologies that aren't just a shade different.
That's a fair point, but what I meant was that the resistance itself is not coalescing around an ideology, right? In the same way that theoretically the Democratic Socialists of America are coalescing around an ideology, or the Communist Party was coalescing around an ideology. As examples, obviously these are very simplistic examples, but what I'm saying is that the resistance is coalescing around a hyper-specific goal, which is that they don't want Trump to be president. And what makes that very dangerous is because of their lack of an ideology, because of their lack of an ideology that checks, that provides a litmus test for both, leaders, members, strategies, etc. It makes it very dangerous, because we're in a situation where, like, basically any means necessary. Like any way to get rid of Trump is a fine way, because that's their only goal, and they don't have to, check their methods against any kind of ideological position. It's more just like, okay, well, does this plan have the potentiality to get rid of Trump? Does accusing him of treason with Russia, of getting rid of Trump, does having sort of a Hamilton elector coup have the possibility of getting rid of Trump? Like, if get rid of Trump, then yes, there's no other criteria for people or strategies. And as we see, and because of this, it means everyone is allowed, right? Because resistance is elevated, allows basically everyone in. George W. Bush, the Weekly Standard. Huh?
That's the masterstroke of it all, though, is this whole idea of the resistance is something that was not first coined by Dems, but definitely pounced upon by Dems, who like to say, well, we have to have a big tent. We have to have a big tent. You can't just, there's no purity test here. And that's what you said just now. And this is something I hear a lot online from a lot of people on either the actual progressive side or within this resistance ideology, is that, hey, you're requiring a litmus test for me to be a part of your super cool club.
Yes.
I don't think that's fair. But in reality, a litmus test of whether or not we agree is something that's necessary. If our goals are not the same, if you're going to claim to be a part of something and then just be like, well, you can't give me a purity test. It's a private club. The hell they can't. The resistance itself, now that's just a hashtag. That's pretty words. That's flowery remarks at a campaign stump speech coming to you real soon, because it's almost that time of year again, folks, where we're going to start seeing elections. There are some special elections now. But I mean, at the end of the day, the resistance is a hashtag. The resistance is an email that you're going to get sent, by your local Dems saying, hey, give us money so we can resist by not actually doing anything or by losing continuously.
Donna Britt, no, okay.
They put a pink pussy hat on it. That's what they did.
That resistance. Sorry for interrupting, but that resistance comes directly out. Like that group you're talking about comes directly out of the Clinton wing of the party, as Adair said, the rank and file liberal voter who was so happy to have John Negroponte, so happy to have Henry Kissinger, so happy to have George W. Bush. Voting for Clinton during the general election. Again, that's the genealogy of that sort of mentality has not changed. That same like anti-Trump metric for tribalism. And so when we talk about having an ideological litmus test, it's actually quite important when you have to have an ideological litmus test for political party or really any group. And we see this not only with the Democratic Party not wanting to have an ideological litmus test because they want to cast this wide net, or we see this with the resistance, we're not wanting to have an ideological litmus test, or rather litmus test beside, hey, I don't like Trump. But we see this now. We've also talked with the Women's March with not wanting to have an ideological litmus test about, well, hey, are you pro-Zionist? Are you kind of pro-imperial? Are you pro-war? Are you anti-minimum wage? Well, that really doesn't fit into this particular version of feminism. So we don't if you are going to come here, you have to leave that part of your ideology at home.
Well, that's
comfortable with leaving that part of your ideology at home. You'd be comfortable with us actively demonizing that part of your ideology because we view it as intrinsically problematic or our ideology. But when you don't have that ideological litmus test, as we see with the Democratic Party, you end up with such a big tent that there's nothing for you to really coalesce around. And we'll come back to that idea about the Democratic Party lacking an ideological sort of baseline or litmus test or whatever you want to call it to check their strategies and check their people and check their goals against. But like this inability to deliver cogent critique of themselves, like this tribalism that exists with the Democratic Party, along with their sort of hyper-specific goal, those three things I mentioned, leaves them incredibly open to conspiracy grifters, and around this Russian thing. It left them incredibly open to being manipulated by people who are opportunists, by people who are con men, by people about con people who are just insane. And I guess the best example of that is Louise Mensch, right? So she's become incredibly popular. She's an conservative. She's an ex MP from, if I remember, Parliament from the UK. She was a conservative Tory, and now she's come to America. She's coming to America like Eddie Murphy in my grandmother's favorite movie, Coming to America.
Get back to the story.
Oh yeah. So she comes to America and she sort of makes a name for herself. Well, she's been in and out of the political spotlight since around the primaries when she was saying that Marco Rubio was going to win Florida. So she's been making a name for herself since but this is how she's made her name for herself in this space that's been created by the resistance for, do you have a plan to get rid of Trump? You have a plan to get rid of Trump? Cool. So let's hear your plan. No plan is too dangerous. No plan's too crazy. No conspiracy theory is too out there or lacks proof, or rather, or lacking of proof to make us disregard it. So I just want to, before anyone else speaks, I just want to read to you, or rather, not me read to you, but I have a list of the things that Louise Mensch has said about Russia and Trump, about Russia specifically, and she's still allowed on TV. She's still allowed to on Bill Maher. She's still allowed to write for New York Times. Here are some of her Russian conspiracy theories. Just top of my head, I remember. She said that there was a spy plane that landed in Connecticut, a Russian spy plane, and that she needed people to go on there and check. And she said that the mobile florist in her neighborhood was a Russian spy, a Russian agent of the Kremlin. The London terrorist attack was organized by Russia, but also Russia was using it as a way to demonize immigrants in the UK. So like both they both organized it, but they were also not the organizers. But that one's very complicated, and too complicated for me. Also, the 15-year-old that Anthony Weiner was sexting was actually a Russian hacker. Which was meant to tarnish his reputation, whatever. I'm sorry. What else? I probably should have written these down because they just get more and more. Oh yeah, Russia was behind not only the Trump campaign but also the Bernie Sanders campaign. So these are the kind of because Russia loves democratic socialists because they're just really big into socialism and democracy. Putin's two favorite things: democracy and socialism, right, guys? But yes, but like it's her willingness to speak to this very specific desire and resistance that has allowed her to elevate herself to this position of spokesperson. She's on TV. We have people who I kind of had some respect for, like retweeting her, like her vast conspiracy theories, and like in this space, like this, this resistance space is full of these grifters, and they are selling. They are selling. Not only are they selling this on Twitter, but they're selling it to news sites. They're selling it to BuzzFeed. They're selling it to the New York Times. They're selling these complex conspiracies, and they're making money doing it. But obviously, she's not the only one. There's Scott Dworkin. There's it exists a bunch of people. But I'm sorry. Please comment on. Richard, you're muted. Your mute is on, Richard.
Oh my goodness! I can't believe I did that again. Every time. I try to be fancy. What I was saying is that the grifting part I think is particularly interesting in that a lot of people have been getting on board with this, and it's been selling pretty well because it's a nonpartisan thing regarding who or whether people will bite into a story wholesale without actually engaging with the evidence behind it and believe just anything that matches up with what they already think is the truth. And we know that the Russia hacked the election already. Over half of Hillary Clinton supporters believed that the Russians actually hacked the ballot box. So if that's where they're starting from, these conspiracy theories and stories line right up with that. But go ahead and get it.
That's important, right? This idea that that conspiracy theories break down by political party, or rather by tribalism. People love the idea of conspiracy theories work so well because people love the idea of these patterns. People love the idea of like having secret knowledge of what's actually going on. That that the story that you've been told by the media, or rather, I guess the media are really people who are pushing this narrative the strongest, with your Maddows and your Maddows, is that. Okay, sorry, that they sorry, I lost my train of thought there. That they love the secret knowledge that comes out of these conspiracy theories, that what you've been told is actually untrue, and that version of reality is not actually. Like, people are still struggling, especially your disaffected Democratic Clinton voter, with the fact that Clinton lost, and this conspiracy theory grappling with this idea it wasn't fair is a good way to deal with that. In talking about Russia hacking the election, people are walking that back now. So even from what I was reading today, that kind of narrative of Russia hacking the election, hacking the DNC, something that has only really ever been put forth by the DNC itself and by private organizations hired by the DNC. Like, I believe FireEye was one of them. What was the other one? I can't think of. Like, basically private cybersecurity firms that have relations with the DNC were investigating, and even FireEye specifically, came out like, oh well, we didn't actually find proof of Russian hacking. It was process of elimination and supposition. It's but people are walking this back already, and it's becoming okay. Well, Russia maybe didn't hack the election, but there was this fake news operation going on. There was collusion, not with Trump, but collusion with RT, collusion with WikiLeaks, collusion on not collusion, but bots on Facebook and Twitter. So we're simultaneously seeing this narrative being driven sort of into obscurity by a few key voices who were big in the beginning, but also still being propped up by other people like Peter Schiff from California, people who have a little bit more, let's say they have more personal interest in keeping this narrative going. And that was a point that Putin made in an interview with CNBC. And I know by quoting Putin now, I'm going to have a problem. But he said this, basically he came out and said that Russia is still looking to have a good relationship with the United States of America. They understand that the United States of America is a powerful country, both economically and militarily, and we'd like to have the relationship with them. All this anti-Russia stuff is just a way for some members of the political party to solidify their power. It comes across as incredibly, theatrical. I mean, insofar that it's theatrical and not just delusional. It's it seems like a good way for a few key players in the media and in the political establishment to keep their power, keep a lock on their power, even at the detriment of basically the Democratic Party and the left. But I'm sorry, go ahead. Anyone who wants to go, jump in there.
So here's something that I've been saying, at least lately, when I've been reading about the whole Russia thing. Is now the thing, it's shifted from Russia hacked the election, like you said, but a lot of the sites that I'm seeing, a lot of things that I'm seeing is that the Trump campaign had illegal ties with Russia. Some way, shape, or form. I was just on Vice News the other day, and I was reading an article about how most of Trump's deals were heavily involved with Russians. And on the one hand, they're like, yeah, so he had one of his towers financed by known Russian mobsters. And I'm like, well, no shit. What do you? He's an obscenely wealthy white dude from New York. I mean, if he's not getting his money from mobsters, it just kind of like it wouldn't fit. He's literally a Hollywood movie villain. That's who Donald Trump is. What I'm seeing now, like I said, is this shift from saying, okay, well, Trump may not have had a direct tie to Putin, or Putin and Russia may not have had the election hacked, but there was a lot of improprieties with the Trump campaign, and there was a lot of collusion with Russia. Just today, I was reading that Michael Flynn, the former director of his national security director, Trump's, he is willing to testify if he's given immunity. And I'm like, well, he did something wrong and we know that, but we don't know that it, has any bearing on the outcome of the election or anything like that. So that's what I'm starting to see. They're starting to shift, and some of the Democratic members of Congress have tweeted things like, wait, the impeachment will happen soon, et cetera, things to that effect. So a lot of it, I think, is frankly Democratic drum beating, trying to say, look, we're doing something, we're being a strong party, because they're tired of getting beaten over by the Republicans who say we're a strong party because we're not going to let the Democrats do anything. And then when we come in, we're going to do the absolute worst things possible, and then people that voted for us wonder why.
Well, I mean the thing is, like, the Democratic... Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, God forbid they talk about something like healthcare and how, a public option, or even better, a universal healthcare system with like a single payer would actually be an effective message for people like Manchin, so that they don't have to go to vote for people like and I guess we'll get into that later. But go ahead, Brandon.
We're going to go right into that, but I mean the issue becomes, of course, like these people who they're elevating within, in service of this narrative. The people who they elevating are inherently problematic, right? We have McCain, Bush, Lindsey Graham, the Weekly Standard. Weekly Standard, for those of you who don't know, is basically a hack media outlet. They were they wrote this entire book about how Osama bin Laden was connected to Saddam Hussein back when the war in Iraq was going on, or even predating the war in Iraq.
Bill Kristol over there has been so consistently wrong about everything for the last 8 years. It's kind of ridiculous. So basically, whatever he says, the opposite is what you can expect.
But this becomes an issue with the resistance. If their criteria for joining is so bare bones, i.e., you hate Trump for whatever reason, that they will accept anyone in. And so we move into, like you said, Michael Flynn is going to get immunity to testify. But insofar the Trumps have this long history with the Russian plutocrats, that just speaks to the global kleptocracy. The global kleptocracy. There is this there is this global class of people who have so much money that it just flows internationally. Like that borders mean nothing to them. Like they do business in Russia, they do business in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar. Like that's just the nature of their business. And to view it as
like a lot of what's being said about things are really just salacious, are things that are salacious, right? Things that are meant to, I guess, to turn off right-wing Christian America, right? They want to turn off flyover country by saying, and I believe he did these things. Trump is an absolutely reprehensible person, a sexist and a rapist. But they're talking about when he was in Russia in 2013, and they're trying to tie this to the dossier that was written by Steele and all these other things. They're saying, well, we figured out who the person who's labeled E in the dossier is by connecting all these completely random dots. But while we're doing this, we're going to continue to tell you the salacious things Donald Trump has done that, frankly, I think any other person would be in jail for, and he deserves to be in jail for quite a bit of the things that he's done. They're talking about he was in Russia at the same time as this person who was a surrogate for his. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. For that, I do apologize. I will try to post a link to this article on Twitter later. But they talked about how he was at Miss Universe pageant or something like that, and he was basically sexually assaulting different contestants, grabbing them, things like that. He invited one back to his hotel room, gave her his card, all these other things. And so a lot of media outlets are using salacious things Donald Trump has done to then say, okay, well, now because he's done these salacious things in this country, he must have ties to this or do this or does this, and that country knows about it. So they've got blackmail. He doesn't want it to come out. I mean, it's just a lot of horse crap. He's a terrible human being. Absolutely. He should be in jail for a lot of the stuff he's done. Absolutely. But that does not mean he's colluding with the Russian government.
But any more so than any other billionaire would be if they decided to run for president with not thinking beforehand about what they had been doing, how that was going to look on a national stage as being president. Probably not that many billionaires that dumb, but I mean, go ahead.
I probably sound like a broken record, but it's this lack of ideological coherency within the Democratic Party, within the resistance, that allows for this kind that makes this kind of stuff necessary as a way to coalesce the party. And so by that I mean, so the Democratic Party, by being a big tent from social or on the left, way to the left, and even maybe center left, all the way to neoliberals and racists and basically anyone who finds some kind of political expediency in putting a D by their name, because the only litmus test is, well, you don't want to be a Republican. There is no actual policy you have to support. There is no actual words you have to say. There's nothing but tribalism. There's nothing but antagonism. There's nothing but two proto-political parties that have devolved into define themselves by opposition. And we see that most strongly with Joe Manchin, right? So for those of you who don't know, Joe Manchin, a senator from West Virginia, came out today after mulling it over, said he's going to vote to confirm Gorsuch for Supreme Court justice. So as people like Chuck Schumer and a few other people in Democratic leadership were mulling over filibustering, people like Joe Manchin, because he lacks that kind of basically it's a Republican with a D by his name, because they lack that kind of coherency. Joe Manchin feels incredibly comfortable coming out and saying, well, you know what, my party, because of ideological reasons, or rather some members of my party, because of ideological reasons, feel the need to filibuster Gorsuch, because he's anti-choice, because he's pro-business to the point he's willing to he believes a trucker shouldn't save his life. He should just either freeze to death to protect corporate cargo or property, because he demonized, I believe, with a mentally disabled person in some case. Like the list of things that Gorsuch has done that makes him not necessarily unqualified, but so far right enough to be viewed as extreme, is endless. But because Joe Manchin is also there with him ideologically, he feels comfortable coming out and supporting him. And I'll just say this before we go any further: Joe Manchin was always going to support Gorsuch. Like the idea that he was just, thinking about it and reviewing things and, giving it a lot of thought was all just theater. Joe Manchin was always going to support Gorsuch. He just felt the need because he was a Democrat and he knew his party was, mulling over actually having a little bit of a backbone in filibustering, that he had to pretend like he was giving it some actual thought. But he was, from the moment Gorsuch was announced, he knew, and this is the same with every Trump appointee he voted for. From the moment they were announced, he knew he was voting for them. And all of the waiting had just been theater.
Yeah, I just want to point out that we also have over here on the screen, Senator Heitkamp also came out in support of.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's so the second Democrat to come out in support of Gorsuch, despite the reasons Brandon just laid out there. And I remember all the way back in the beginning of February, I called Joe Manchin was going to be supportive of the SCOTUS pick, and was going to basically, while the Democrats were talking about filibustering, he was going to be networking with his folks to try and figure out who else he could get to either vote with him or to not filibuster, and it sounds like it's already breaking. That there can't be, that there's not going to be a filibuster, even like we were saying last week on last week's show, that's unlikely that they're going to be able to do anything to stop Gorsuch. And I think these recent announcements that happened this afternoon just continue to fill that out. And I think you talked really great at length earlier, describing what about both the resistance and I think it carries over to the Democratic Party to a large degree that allows this to happen, because you'll see the folks that we've been hearing from in the resistance that sometimes like to say negative things about Bernie Sanders, say something negative about Bernie Sanders again before you see them say anything negative about Manchin or Heitkamp coming out to support Trump yet again.
The guy from Share Blue? The guy from Share Blue? I don't know his name. You know what I'm talking about. The guy from Share Blue who's just like, for people talking about Democratic Party needs to get rid of people, it should be Tulsi Gabbard and Nina Turner and Bernie Sanders. Like, they're not real Democrats. And of course, the metric for determining whether you're a real Democrat or not is whether you toe party lines blindly, because that's their only litmus test. It's incredibly tribalistic. It's like, okay, well, do you support Democrats and whatever Democratic establishment says? If so, then you're, welcome to the party. If not, then you're like, even if your ideology seems to be more in tune with the foundations of the Democratic Party and FDR and etc., you're just not a real Democrat. You're like, and so therefore I can't vote for you, even if my ideology is more closely aligned with yours. It's on a policy by policy issue. And but not reduce it down to ideology, but most people's ideology really is not that coherent. It's more like policy by policy by policy. If I match up with you the most, I should probably vote for you. But my ideology is more tribalistic than I'm willing to admit it, and I'm sort of sure it is what it is.
Yeah, if anybody watching happens to see somebody who was on that Bernie's not a Democrat, not a real Democrat kick, but then is also criticizing Heitkamp and Manchin as not being real Democrats, please go ahead and tweet them at me, send them my way. So I'll happily eat my words, but I'm pretty sure most of the Bernie's not a real Democrat folks are staying relatively silent about this. Go ahead, get in there, Adair.
But I 2 points. A, for those that are saying Bernie's not a Democrat, well, congratulations, he's not. He's an independent senator from Vermont. I thought we'd covered this. Shut up. You're not important. Nobody loves you. Now, going on and talking about the whole policy by policy basis, I don't even think it's that much. I don't even think it goes that deep. I think if people went by a policy by policy basis in the primary, for God's sake, almost everybody that voted for Clinton would have been like, yeah, no, this Bernie dude is the best. It has nothing to do with policy by policy, but everything to do with, is your name familiar? Do I have rose-colored memories of you from whatever reason? And do you match up with what I think this politician should be? E.g., do you have, and this is important even for me, identity politics again, but identity politics in this kind of perverse manner of, so in the case of Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders, a lot of times I was told I'm a sexist because I support Sanders, and so therefore I must hate women.
That's not why you're a sexist. It's not why I'm a sexist either. It's just like, anyway.
Hey, sexism is a thing in the country, and that all men, we do need to work really hard on our own issues with that. But what it is in the Democratic Party is, if you don't look like the quote unquote Democrat, if you don't have this rose-colored view of everything, if you have not been in the party for the last 20, 25 years, you're not a real Democrat. If you're from some minority community, well, you automatically are a Democrat until you do something I don't like, and then you can no longer be a Democrat. It's not so much
you're too the white devil.
Policy. Yeah, very true.
That's a really interesting dynamic that we should really talk about one day, but that's a rabbit hole I don't want to go down. Like what it means to be a minority against the Democratic Party when the Democratic Party has kind of what would you say
Entrapped.
commandeered the political identity of minorities and oppressed people as part of their as part of their platform, like as part of what they represent. They represent this one, our last great hope, and if you disagree with them, you kind of lose the ability to you lose your agency and autonomy.
Yeah,
Like,
you
of course
lose your
free
seat
to
at the
agree with
table,
them.
man. Yeah.
You're of course you're free to agree with them. If you agree with them, of course, like you're just a great minority. But if you don't, like somehow you become a tool of the
Russia.
white supremacy or Russia. I remember that was a critique against Keith Ellison. Like he's just a tool of Bernie Sanders and his white supremacists. It's like, what? Like, excuse me? It's like, so if a black person disagrees with the Democratic Party, like, he loses his right to blackness,
Right.
and agency. But because, like, of course, black people are just intrinsically invested in the Democratic Party. So what Adair said is true. But I also think there's more to it insofar I think a lot of people have internalized that they've drunk the Kool-Aid Democratic Party has been selling for the past 30 years. They've internalized in the case of Manchin that you can't get anyone to the left of Manchin. Like, oh well, in West Virginia that's just the way things are, and if we want to have a Democrat in the seat, which is the most important part, right? We want to have a Democrat in that seat. He has to be indistinguishable from a Republican. But it's like, okay, but if that's the case, then from a policy and ideological standpoint, why would it actually matter if he's not going to support your policies and he's not going to really espouse the ideology you believe in? It's like, well, because he's a Democrat and that increases the number of Democrats that we have in the Senate. It's like, but he won't vote for you. That's entirely theatrical. So you can say, well, we have the majority or we have a certain number of seats, but it's from a voting standpoint, it just doesn't work that way. But they have the same mentality about healthcare, and they've been cultivating that same mentality about healthcare in their base, that notion that, well, these things are just not popular enough to be politically expedient. They're just not possible. And I think now we're seeing that this is going to be a good transition. I'm so happy with myself when I make good transitions into talking about healthcare, because this is another one of those issues that is making Democratic establishment and the hacks that support them, their line punditry, support them, hate Bernie Sanders because he's going out there now. And although, as we all know, Representative Conyers has had a single payer health care bill since 2003 every year in the House. In 2003 I was going to say debuted, but he introduced it for the first time with Dennis Kucinich, and he's introduced it every year since then, and he's always had trouble, or rather a decent amount of trouble, getting co-sponsors, and it's never really been marketed or gained the attention that it's finally gotten to this point, to the point in which early in this debate about single payer that Bernie Sanders kind of brought light to, the Justice Democrats were confused enough to say that, well, Conyers hasn't signed on to his own bill yet in the House. Like, what?
Right.
Because that's just indicative of the kind of stranglehold the Democratic Party had on this narrative that single payer healthcare was just something that could not happen. It could not happen because there's a lot of reasons why, but from their argument, this is what fueled the argument that Bill Clinton had to triangulate in the 90s. Well, it can't happen because the country is just not there yet. Of course, we personally, to quote Nancy Pelosi, would want to pepper the country with community health centers and have single payer and have no insurance. Like, that's my personal view, but the country is just not there with us. So we have to do we have to take these small steps. And Bernie Sanders has gotten out there. He's gone to these red states. He's gone to coal mining country. He's gone to the middle of places that Hillary Clinton should have won but lost, and has talked about healthcare, and has been widely received with just open arms. This idea that, hey, yeah, we should have single payer healthcare. That's a great idea. I don't know why we don't have that.
At the basic level, that healthcare is a right, and so the argument isn't like whether we should. It's about how do we make it to where everybody has access to healthcare, not health insurance. And is mandating health insurance a good way to do that? Well, basically every developed country has decided, no, that's a terrible way to do it. Don't do that. You can either do at least a public option or a single payer system or some combination of the two, where there's some minor room for private insurance for people who want to wait in fancier waiting rooms. So, yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's important to talk about the differences and why which ones go. But go ahead.
We should, right? So let's talk about this real quick. So a public option is basically providing. In some way it is a social democratic sort of take. It's right. So the public sector is going to provide alternative to what's being provided in the private sector, which is health insurance. Medicare for all is usually just a code word for people for single payer, which is not technically Medicare for all.
Exactly.
Right? Because
Medicare for all just pulls the best out of any whatever you call universal health insurance. Medicare for all pulls the best. Continue.
Yeah, Medicare for all is like what people call it, but that's usually a code for single payer. Because single payer, if we were to establish a single payer healthcare plan, I believe Hillary Clinton used this argument disingenuously in the primaries, if I'm not mistaken. If you were to pass single payer, you would in fact abolish Medicare. You would abolish Medicare, you would abolish Medicaid, you would abolish a lot of these things that would become
you wouldn't
inherently
need them.
wouldn't need it anymore, right? But so we have this, with the Democratic Party and their neoliberal wisdom and talking about the political realities, they feel as though the better alternative is to engage in some kind of complex regulatory scam, but scheme. Some sort of complex, involving needless technocrats, needless math, needless bureaucracy, needless regulation. Basically, regulate our way from the ACA, which leaves about, I want to say, 10% of Americans uncovered or uninsured, all the way to universal health care. But as Adair said, single payer or bust is more than just a sort of issue of practicality. Calling for single payer is calling for the recognition that healthcare is a right and should not be in the hands of corporations who only really have, profit motives for why they would provide healthcare. Apart from all of the actual sort of pragmatic and economic reasons for why single payer healthcare is better, and we shouldn't seek universal coverage through private insurance, which some countries do. I believe Japan does that, and I want to say the Dutch, no, Denmark. Okay, I'm not gonna. I believe the country starts with a D, but they do that, but it's not as popular as single payer healthcare, because it still involves all this needless bureaucracy, and that's the primary waste of the health insurance industry. Needless bureaucracy, needless checking whether you qualify for X or whether you're covered for Y, or whether you have reached your copay or deductible, or all these other issues that go away with single payer, because single payer just says, okay, well, are you a citizen? I mean, if we're gonna do that metric, hey, do you have your single payer card? Are you a citizen? Are you a member of are you X, Y, and Z? Okay, cool, you're covered. That's it. There is no other consideration.
We need to fix people up regardless of whether from free. That's my opinion. Healthcare should not be reserved strictly. But here's the thing.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. Is like I agree that it shouldn't be it shouldn't be limited just to citizens either. I mean, it doesn't help any good if an immigrant farm worker gets hurt in the field and we don't take care of him and it gets worse. Whatever. None of that helps. But as far as to give any credence that we can to the Democratic Party line of that the country isn't ready for it. Maybe the country isn't ready for a Republican all-out assault on what government-run healthcare would be, and maybe they win that fight. But a public option? There is absolutely no way Democrats can't win a public option, especially in the places where the ACA, the insurers have already pulled out, and they don't have any choice on who they would. If it was so that those people would be gladly welcome a choice of a public option. But and I think it leads us towards single payer eventually anyway. But go ahead.
Public option is so popular. Single payer is so popular, and this is why Bernie Sanders is popular. So we saw that Fox News poll that pointed out that Bernie Sanders is like the most popular politician in America, more popular probably than Jesus, which I guess is kind of ironic, coincidental, whatever. Anyway, the point is, like, and people have sort of taken that to like be some sort of intrinsic value about Bernie Sanders. Like, but let's be honest, Bernie Sanders from a politician standpoint is not as charismatic or as sort of polished as a Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama. The reason why Bernie Sanders is, he has it really on easy mode because he's selling popular programs. Like Bernie Sanders is popular because the things that he's espousing are popular, and that's when and so the Democratic Party, in the fact of their establishment and their rank and file and their aligned punditry, they don't hate him despite him being popular. They hate him because he's popular. They hate him because his popularity, especially as it pertains to the fact that his popularity is derived from the programs that he's espousing, demonstrates the fact that they've been lying to their rank and file and basically all of America for 30 years. That they've been putting out this hypocritical position that they would support these things if only they were winners, but they are winners.
Turns out they weren't even trying to.
Because what they've been doing.
What they'll say is that, well, if Republicans win at Bernie and win at healthcare like they win at Hillary, then it'll all go down. Is like, but I really don't think that anybody that knows about Bernie doesn't know he supports universal healthcare or doesn't know that he supports increased minimum wage or any of the policies that they all say are unpopular. So I think that's really important. Go ahead, Eric, get in there.
Here's the thing: is the Democrats would win, single payer would win. Universal healthcare would win. However you want to phrase it, the furthest left would win. Period. It's that simple. The problem is the Democrats don't like to actually go and do work. Democrats like to sit back and just be like, well, we're going to win these seats because we're just not a terrible, shitty racist. But you have to do work. You have to actually govern. You have to do the things that people want you to do. The biggest enemy to universal health care in the United States is the Democratic Party. And I say it because of this. The Democratic Party will not allow it to move forward. The Democratic Party may say we agree with it, may say this is a great idea. They're going to try to shift the blame to the Republicans by saying, well, Republicans, they'll just beat us down, guys. They'll just beat us down, and we're that scared kid on the playground, and I can't take another wedgie. Shut the hell up. Be the actual governing party and go do what you're supposed to do, because the fact of the matter is this will sell to Republicans. This goes to everybody. The reason why Democrats won't do it is simply because Democrats are being paid too damn much by pharmaceutical companies, by the insurance industry. It is that damn simple. You have the one senator from Missouri, I cannot remember her name right now, who's going after the opioid companies that are making Oxycontin and all these other things that are leading to this gigantic opioid crisis where people are literally dying, especially in these red states. But the Republicans are like, oh yeah, no, we're not going to sign on to that. But neither is her party. Her own party refuses to get behind things like that and check the people that are doing that. That's why they have house slaves like Cory Booker. I was going to use another word. I won't use that because this is a family-friendly channel. But that's why you got house slaves like Cory Booker, who the moment the pharmaceutical company says jump, he says, yes, massa, how high? That is exactly what the Democratic Party is. The Democratic Party is a slave to money and is a slave to big donors. That's why universal health care is not going through in America.
It's an addiction. We'll have a show one day about where I just go on my addiction rant, but we have just the last couple minutes, so go ahead and get in what you were going to say, Brandon, and just give us some time for closing.
Of course, yes. I'll make this quick. So here's what I was going to say, right? So Adair, the course, right? Anyone who tells you single payer healthcare is not possible or popular on the Democratic side is corrupt, right? They're just corrupt. They've been corrupted by private interests. That's just the way it is. And so my only question becomes, right, how much of this is ideological and how much of this is just pure corruption, like just pure greed? So I mean, when they say it's not possible, do they actually think that it is impossible, both that from a political standpoint, because we know that's not true. Or do they mean like it's morally or ethically impossible from their sort of ideological standpoint? Like they're trying to square that circle. They're trying to square the idea of, well, if we have single payer, there'll be no choice in the marketplace, and that's not capitalism. And we have to have capitalism, like Nancy Pelosi said. We're just capitalists. But how much of it is actually just that? And how much of it is how much have they been drinking the Kool-Aid that's been put out by the health insurance industry that, hey, the private market is the best way to solve any problem. The problem of healthcare, the problem of pollution, the problem of opioid addiction. You got to solve it through the private market. If you don't solve it through the private market, if you don't solve it through some sort of complex technocratic means, if you don't have means testing, if you don't have all these sort of neoliberal gobbledygook, the solution is just simply not as good. Like if your solution is simple and doesn't involve the private market, it doesn't involve a bunch of needless agencies and bureaucracy, your solution isn't viable. Maybe it's not viable. Maybe it's viable from a practical standpoint, but from my ideology requires these things, it is not viable. And the reason I say a lot of these Democrats are just neoliberal fundamentalists is because if we switch this around, right, and we said, well, 24 million people in America, I believe that's how many people are uninsured right now, run the risk of going bankrupt or dying because their leaders say that providing them health care goes against the Quran. We would think they were crazy. But because they say it goes against capitalism or some sort of radical notion of neoliberal capitalism, it's okay. Well, that's just the private market. You got to have choice, man. Right? That's all I have to say. So I'm gonna finish it there. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties.
Yeah, I'll quickly just say that I think you're right, and I think their ideology is essentially their rationalization for their addiction to greed and their greed for money and power. And I just want to thank everybody for watching. You can find me on Twitter down here. See some of my angry tweets at Joe Manchin and some other Democrats. Otherwise, I'll pass it off to Adair.
Hey, folks, thanks, guys, for having me back again. I apologize to you guys at home, especially for taking the sabbatical that I did. If anybody at home actually really does need somebody to talk to, depression can be a hard thing to get through alone. Please find somebody. If you feel like you don't have anybody you can talk to, my Twitter handle is down there. We can DM about it. Here for everyone that's watching the show tonight. Have a good night, and thanks for having me back.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone. Good luck.